Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. I had the chance to go to Italy to visit my family for about 3 weeks in the month of July. It was a fantastic time, and I remember many things to be the same, and some changed. For example, the push for progress in southern Italy. It's something that can be seen throughout the everyday life, and also the thing that cars are more modern, they are bigger, however, still the infrastructure and the road are smaller. So today we are approaching a different theme. We are approaching murder and revenge in the Middle Ages. Imagine a world where a single act of violence could tear apart families, villages, even entire communities. Well, welcome to the medieval world where murder wasn't just a crime, it was a challenge to honor, loyalty, and survival. A story that stretches across centuries. Today, we'll explore how people back then dealt with bloodshed, not with courts or prisons, but with vengeance and uneasy peace. In the next 5 episodes, we will go from the rugged hills of Lombard, Italy, to the icy shores of Viking Iceland, to the bustling streets of Dante's Florence. It's a tale of how people dealt with murder, a far cry from the modern justice system, through revenge, gold, and fragile truces. Murder in the Middle Ages wasn't just a personal loss, it was a rupture in the social fabric, a disruption that could ignite feuds lasting for generations to come. Whether it was a killing, a beating,
Wow, I just got a big headache.
or a brutal assault,
What did you do? You piece of shit! Fuck you! I will fucking kill you!
the central question wasn't simply who did this, who did the murder, who did the killing, but how do we mend this? How do you restore a community broken by violence? When we refer to the term Middle Ages, we need to keep in mind that it can be a term that is misleading. It wasn't only one period, but a sprawling chaotic millennium lasted 1,000 years. So societies like the Lombard warriors, Viking seafarers, and Florentine poets were worlds apart. And yet, strangely, they shared one thing in common. They all approached murder differently than we do today. In the modern West, murder is rare, a shocking crime that triggers the machinery of the state. We send killers to prison for life, or in some places, execute them. Is the gravest offense, punished with the greatest severity in hopes of erasing it from society. So, welcome back once again, and let's dive into this new series, Murder and Vengeance in the Middle Ages. In the medieval world, Middle Ages, murder wasn't an anomaly. It was part of everyday life. A neighbor's grudge, a drunken brawl, a matter of pride. Any of these could end in bloodshed, and few were surprised. Instead of judges and jails, they had systems built on vengeance and negotiation, where honor often mattered more than justice. This was a world where a payment could heal a death, but only if it satisfied both sides. The aim wasn't punishment, it was balance. A life taken might be repaid in gold, in cattle, or in blood. The wrong move could trigger a feud that outlasted generations. But the right gesture, a settlement, a public apology, a carefully calculated payment might stop the violence before it spread. So, how do they live with murder? Not through law and order as we know it, but through memory, customs, and the constant delicate dance between revenge and peace. In the Middle Ages, despite the wide range of societies, from the chaos of the barbarian invasions to the structured urban life of the late medieval communes, they shared one fundamental assumption: Murder was normal. It was something that happened often to anyone and for all kinds of reasons. People had not yet learned to suppress what is, at its core, a deeply human impulse, the urge to strike out at someone who frustrates us, threatens us, or stands in our way. In the medieval world, this impulse wasn't seen as something that could be eliminated. It was simply part of everyday life. Of course, a killing was serious. It disrupted peace. It caused turmoil. But it wasn't extraordinary. It didn't provoke the kind of horror we might expect today. In fact, medieval societies often responded with greater outrage to theft than to murder. Why? Because theft was viewed as a calculated betrayal of the social order. Stealing meant deliberately breaking the rules in cold blood with no personal provocation, just greed. It threatened the foundations of trust and property rights that held the community together. And because private property was sacred, the thief was cast out, placed outside the protection of society. But murder, that was different. If you killed a neighbor after a long-standing dispute, people understood. They didn't necessarily fear you. They might even sympathize. You had your reasons. Yes, it was a serious act, but it wasn't monstrous. It didn't mean you were a danger to everyone else. Throughout the Middle Ages and even into the early modern era, this mindset persisted. A person who had killed wasn't automatically seen as suspicious or evil. In fact, many individuals in high society had taken lives, sometimes publicly, and yet moved on with their lives, their status intact. Because the justice system didn't aim to lock murderers away forever or sentence them to death as a rule. That would have been unrealistic, even disruptive. Society wasn't designed to handle permanent removal. The goal wasn't punishment, it was restoration. And so, when violence shattered the peace, people turned to two interwoven solutions: vengeance and compensation. These weren't crude or chaotic responses. They followed strict customs, with defined steps for resolving the damage and rebuilding the fragile balance that held communities together. The most basic and immediate form of justice in medieval society was simple. You kill my brother, then I have the right to kill you. Revenge wasn't just accepted, it was legal. It wasn't a matter for the authorities. It wasn't the community's responsibility. It was personal, a private affair between families, clans, and close allies. If someone assaulted you, beat you, or killed someone close to you, it was your right and often your duty to respond. Failing to take revenge meant losing face. Honor was on the line. But legally speaking, if your brother was killed and you struck back, no law condemned you. That principle held true in the so-called primitive barbarian kingdoms and in the polished courts of Renaissance Florence. Even in Dante's world, revenge was considered legitimate because it kept the conflict private. It was a way of keeping the community out of it. Ideally, this kind of justice was supposed to restore balance. You kill my brother-in-law, so I kill your cousin. Now we're even. But that's the fantasy version. In reality, things never balanced so simply. Because the other side might not agree. They might say, wait a minute, we had good reasons for our killing. But the man you killed in return, he was worth more. He was important. Your act wasn't equal. It was an outrage. And just like that, the spiral begins again and again. One revenge leads to another, and then another. Medieval people understood this danger well. They knew that revenge rarely broke peace. Instead, they risked unleashing an endless cycle of violence. One family attacking another, then retaliated against again and again. Entire lineages could be locked in a quarrel that lasted generations. And among the Germanic peoples of early medieval Europe, this pattern was so common, so deeply embedded in social life, that they had a specific word for it. We can take a look at the words of the Lombards that left in the Italian language. The Lombards migrated from northern Europe to Italy in the 6th century AD under King Alboin. They invaded in 568, establishing a kingdom centered in northern Italy, with Pavia as its capital. Initially pagan or Arian Christians, they adopted Catholic Christianity and blended Germanic and Roman traditions. The rule lasted until 774, when Charlemagne conquered their kingdom, integrating it into the Carolingian Empire. The Lombards left a lasting legacy in Italy, influencing its culture, laws, and place names like Lombardy. They merged with the local population and stopped speaking Lombardic, leaving a series of words. The Lombardic words in the Italian language are very revealing. For example, we have few like guerra, war, tregua, truce, zuppa, soup, bullone, boat, truffa, scam, and Lombardic verbs like arraffare, snatch, schiacciare, smash, russare, snore. And then there's a word purely Lombardic carried over and changed into the language. This word is called Faida. Faida is a Lombardic word for a concept that the ancient Romans hadn't thought of, so they didn't have a word for it. But for the Lombards, it was an everyday thing. It generally translates to feud or vendetta, even if vendetta itself is an Italian word, referring to a prolonged conflict or blood feud between families, clans, or groups, often involving cycles of revenge. When murder or violence occur, the injured party has the right to take revenge. That's clear. But history and experience show that it rarely ends there. Revenge sparks revenge. One act of blood calls for another. And when that cycle begins, it can be nearly impossible to stop. That's why nearly all so-called barbarian societies developed a second method to restore order: compensation. Instead of spilling more blood, the one who committed the violence, whether a beating, an injury, or even a murder, could offer payment. If the injured party accepted compensation, they renounced their right to revenge, and the feud was settled. To us today, it might seem cold, even dishonorable. They killed my son, and I just take the money, we shake hands and move on. It might sound like a betrayal of justice. But to understand medieval people, we need to step into their worldview. In their eyes, accepting compensation wasn't dishonorable. It was a powerful way to defend honor. Because the payment wasn't a bribe or hush money. It was a public acknowledgement. It said, yes, we wronged you. Yes, your son's life had value. And here's the price we're willing to pay to make peace and avoid your revenge. That sum, often large, was visible to everyone. It proved how much the victim was worth and by extension how respected their family was. It was, in a very real way, a measure of honor. And in a society where honor was everything, where people were were willing to kill for it, ironically, accepting money could be the most dignified, the most peaceful response. If the payment was appropriate, it preserved face, avoided more violence, and brought peace to the whole community. It wasn't about forgiveness, it was about balance, and it worked because it gave people a way out of the revenge spiral without losing standing or respect. So far as we've seen, murder in the Middle Ages wasn't something new. It was something that was practiced. You kill my cousin, then I'll kill one of your family, and the cycle went on and on and on. It was a matter to restore faith, to restore honor. But then, moving on with the first barbarian populations in northern Italy, what happened is that the Lombards introduced a new system, introduced compensation in order to pay the victims and try to restore order in society in a way that could save face and the honor. The payment wasn't a slap in the face in order to inflict more injury to the other party, but it was a way to say we acknowledge the value of that person. Therefore, if you would accept this payment to restore the order and, of course, the owner. So this wasn't just something that would happen. In some cases, people were more encouraged to take revenge than pay compensation. But as we'll see next, there is a term that was introduced later that wasn't present in Latin. That was called vidrigildus. So wergild. This term, what does wergild mean? We'll find out next time in our next episode, and we'll take a deeper look into how these newly barbaric kingdoms would deal with revenge and compensation in the Middle Ages. Thank you very much for following up in this first episode. I'll see you next time. Bye.